All right, what I want to do now, having discussed the importance of apologetics, is I want to talk about this central aspect that is often kind of debated nowadays, amazingly, which is the concept of truth. It seems to be very hip and seems to be almost cool to say that, well, you have your truth and I have my truth. And those truths don't necessarily have to agree with each other. The very idea of saying something like that is ridiculous. It's to redefine the idea of truth as opinion. It is true, see how I'm using the term, it's unavoidable, that I can say, well, you have your opinion about something, I have my opinion about something. You have your angle or your perspective about something, and so do I, and those two may not agree. But just because that is true doesn't mean that what you're saying is just true for you and not true for me. For example, it's true that you're watching this presentation at this particular time. It's true that your name is whatever your name is, that my name is Paul Henebury. It's true that I was born in Manchester, England. And it's true that I'm a Christian by the grace of God. There are all kinds of truths that are inescapable. The places that we live, the places that we go to college, the places that we work, the people that we're married to, the children that we may have, the parents that we may have. These are things that they're not just opinions. These are things that we hold to be true because they are things that are the biggest aspects of reality that define us, and where we situate ourselves, and from where we know ourselves and know the world. Now, we saw last week that Paul in Romans chapter 1 speaks about the fact that that man, as a rebel, as a sinner against God, receives truth from God but then suppresses it. And this suppression of truth can take all kinds of different shapes. Nowadays, although I think the time is changing on this, influenced by a lot of the post-structuralists of French academia, it's kind of cool to say that truth doesn't really exist. Truth is something, as it were, that is a story to be deconstructed. Of course, the people that are doing the deconstructions, they believe that they are doing the right and proper thing in deconstructing the stories and the meta-narratives that we've told ourselves, and they believe that the reasons that they give for doing that are true reasons, not falsehoods. If they were falsehoods and they believed they were falsehoods, then of course they wouldn't be doing it. No, they believe these things are true. Roland Barthes, for example, liked to talk about the fact that the author, for example, an author like Peter Harrison here of this book, what he has to say is not the most important thing. He's dead as far as the reader is concerned. That what really matters is that when we open the book, what we get out of the book and the way we interpret the book is the most important thing. Whether Peter Harrison, who as a matter of fact is still alive, meant that when he put it in the book or not, that's really not the important thing. What's important is what we're getting out of it, the story we're telling ourselves from our reading of his book. That's what Barthes taught, and others like him. Of course, where did he teach that stuff? In his books. And what did he want us to do with the book? Well, he wanted us to take him seriously as an author. And so very often what people do when they are teaching this nonsense is exempting themselves from the ideas that they're trying to foist upon the rest of us. Christianity says that that is part of the suppression of truth. It's just one example of it. There are other examples. An example may be to say, well, what's really important is that I'm a good person. And being a good person, any God, if he's up there at all, has got to agree with my self-appraisal and therefore cannot shut me out of heaven. I deserve it because I'm a nice guy, I'm a nice person. Again, that's a story that we tell ourselves. But in doing that, we're actually in conflict with the Bible. We are suppressing the truth in order to tell ourselves that. Still others believe other religions. In fact, these other religions are explained by the fact that we're shutting out the truth, we're pushing it under, and therefore what we need to do is that we need to put something in its place. And because of these big questions, they need to be answered. Usually they've been answered in the past by other gods, other philosophies, and so on. None of these philosophies really can answer the great questions of life, and many of them really don't make sense when you articulate them in our day-to-day life. A person that says all truth is relative, for example, is not going to test that theory by jumping off a 10-story building. He's going to actually believe that if he jumps off the building, he's going to be squashed on the pavement, just like anybody else would. All truth is not relative. You can't live that way. Somebody who says that all of reality is Maya, is just an illusion, that person is going to go to work for a living, earn money, buy a house, and these things he doesn't hold to be illusions in his day-to-day life. He owns these things to be realities that he has to put up with and has to work within in his life. And even those that have given up daily work and interaction with the humdrum of social existence, these people, when they tell us that all reality is illusion, who are they talking to? Well, they're talking to us. Clearly, if they're talking to us, they must believe we're not illusions. Otherwise, of course, they are somewhat certifiable, aren't they? So I hope that you can see that, that when we believe certain ideas, we need to test them to see whether they really are true in the real world. Now, the Bible is very interesting in this respect, because the Bible says some things that actually we can test and that really are clearly defined within our everyday experience. For example, the reality of human sin. The Bible says that sin is the suppression of the truth. Sin is our being independent from the God who created us and from the word of that God. That sin is all of the corruption and the pollution that's within our hearts, all of those things like violent thoughts, covetousness, lust, all of these different things that all of us struggle with to one degree or another. Anger or depression, all of these different emotions, pride and so on. These are the things that corrupt us. And they come from inside of us, they don't come from outside of us. And so we're part of the problem. Being part of the problem, of course, we have a decision to make as to whether we're going to face up to the kind of people we are in God's world. Are we going to admit what we, in our heart of hearts, really know about ourselves, that we're kind of no good? Or are we going to say, no, I don't believe that, we're really not as bad as all that, and instead paint ourselves to be really good people inside, and just forget about all of the confusion and the mess and the anger and the arrogance that may be there that we don't want to talk about. Now, if we're going to do the latter, I hope you can see that we are not going to be in a position to receive truth. We're only going to be in a position to admit the truths that make us feel good and say something to us that we like to hear. We're not going to admit any hard truths that tell us that we need to change. We need to submit to God, that we are part and parcel of the problem of the world. We shouldn't be pointing fingers at everybody else. We should be pointing fingers at ourselves. Truth, you see, in the biblical worldview, is not just an abstract thing, like 2 + 2 = 4. Truth is an ethical thing. It has an ethical dimension too. Even, by the way, 2 + 2 = 4 has an ethical dimension, because the fact that we can do that multiplication and a cow can't tells us something about ourselves as creatures of God who have been made in the image of God. The fact that we have numbers that make sense in the external world has to be explained, and it can be explained not by the fact that there is some kind of evolutionary accident, but that they've come from the mind of an eternal being. And if we're not in right relation to that eternal being, then we're using his gifts, his truths, in a wrong way. And we're saying to ourselves that these things that we're just taking for granted, these things that we are believing and basing our lives on, they don't come from God. They have another explanation. And we will invent another explanation. Mary Poplin, in her book, Is Reality Secular?, writes about a class, a PhD class that she was taking, and it was a discussion they were having about secularism. Secularism is the Western belief that we put God and quote-unquote religion into the margins, and we don't bring religion into the public square. Everything is a no-God zone, as it were. And in the discussions about secularism and whether reality is secular, she listened to a student who thought that he could answer the question in the affirmative. But this is how he started his answer. He said, putting aside just for the moment the question of truth, and then started to address the question. And what Poplin says is that maybe only a few of those PhD candidates actually realized the gravity of what that student had just said. I don't think the student himself understood what he just said. You put aside the aspect of truth, what on earth is he going to say that's going to be worth listening to, that's going to have any basis within the real world? You have to believe that what you're saying is true and not false. Otherwise, why say it? You have to believe that the question that you've been asked has an answer, and that answer is a correct answer, therefore a true answer. If you believed it was a false answer, then why would you give it? But you see, this is the mindset that we have today. The Christian truth is this, that we can't get away from being confronted by the truth of God wherever we turn. But it is up to us what we do with that truth. Are we going to continue to suppress it in unrighteousness and invent another explanation? Or are we going to admit that what the Bible says about us as creatures, as fallen, as independent, who should come back to God and be dependent on God, that is the true picture? And when we do that, we will see ourselves in the world as it is. Or are we going to just go on our merry way and say that, well, we're fine, we're okay, we can believe what we want to believe. We can shut God out, at least the God of the Bible, and still find fruitful explanations for life and the world.